Stirling, but I'm going to pause for a second. We have the recording started, so handing you over now to Ros and John to talk us through their 10 ways that they beat COVID. Thank you.
It does help if you switch on your microphone when you start these things, doesn't it? So hello, Ros Walker. I'm a learning design and technology specialist at the University of Stirling, and my colleague is
struggling to put his microphone on. He is John McMillan, also a learning design and technology specialist.
And I think it's only fair, given what we're presenting today, that we introduce the rest of the team as well. So we have Derek, who is our team leader. Sarah, Steve and Louise are all fellow learning design specialists. And Andy Sim is a new acquisition about a year or so ago, and he's our media person. So we do have a specialist filming one. I should also mention Susan Gregg, who was part of the team with us until May and then chose to move on. And we now also have Caroline Nanfelt, who's just very recently joined us and is working well with us on what we're doing.
Okay, so starting off with the first tip that we have, the first aspect tip, I'm not sure how we're going to describe these. The first item was the foundations that we were building these on. So obviously we started with emergency pedagogy, as I think a lot of us did in the final months of the spring semester, but we very quickly focused on what we were going to have to do for the autumn semester, which was going to have to be a far more considered approach to support staff to have a more sustainable, more well-rounded approach to online learning. And there were three key parts of those foundations. The first was contingency plans that we developed after a major flood hit the campus in 2019. Most of our teaching spaces ended up out of commission around about July of that year. We had to draw up some plans very quickly for how we were going to cope, how we were going to have very significantly blended learning for the autumn semester. Somehow, I'm not sure how they managed to do it, but our teaching spaces were all back up and running by September. We didn't need those then, but they became a strong starting point for summer 2020. The next aspect of the foundation would be our own ongoing work developing online programs. So we work with academics to design and build modules for online delivery with a very thorough design process based on principles like active learning, building a narrative for the learning so that students have a clear path, and ensuring that when creating video content, we script segments, we keep them under 6 minutes, and we try to always look at the social aspects as well as delivering content. The third part that underpinned all of our work was all of the work that we've done in advance, the existing practice to support staff with digital pedagogy, where we had a course called Online Blended and Distance Learning that we ran with academic development. We were doing lots of workshops on methods and tools of incorporating digital tools into courses, and we were obviously doing work one-to-one with tutors. So between those three strands, we had a really strong starting point. We weren't starting from scratch. And the second item was that we had significant institutional buy-in. Right from the start, senior management came in, made decisions quickly, communicated quickly that for autumn we were going to be online. That meant that as a team, we were able to go out, deliver sessions, run courses that were going to support staff on their way through all of this. And as part of that, we had 5 Stirling principles of online learning. I'm not going to run through them right now, but if you want to, I think they're available on our website. This allowed us to focus entirely, and we were able to support staff to deliver 724 modules online for the first time this semester. At times, this process looked a bit like completing a jigsaw without having a picture to work from. It wasn't always clear how our work aligned with the work of others, but the direction from senior level meant that as the summer progressed, we began to see how everything was piecing together. It was also noticeable that the perceptions of what learning technologists are and what we can offer the university was changing over that time, and senior management were putting their confidence in us to support staff as we entered the autumn semester.
So I've just looked back through my emails, and it was the 20th of February. I was on holiday in Lanzarote, and I sent an email to one of our senior managers and said, if it looks like we might have to do any more online teaching in the next few weeks, we've got some materials that can help. And it's quite ironic now looking back on, because you can see that everything actually happened incredibly fast after that. And as John said, often like we were trying to do this jigsaw and there were so many things happening in so many different places. What was incredible was the speed with which a team came together. I'd already been on a short secondment to academic development, so we had good contact with our academic development colleagues. Management were meeting regularly with us and looking at what we were doing and coming up with plans. Student learning services, so those extra support services that students get with their academic work, came on board. Inclusion, our inclusion department also, and the Students' Union, and we were all liaising all together, trying to build this picture, often only a step ahead of what we were actually releasing as we went through.
Okay, the next item that we had that was a significant step for us was developing a new template for Canvas and developing a new way of using our VLE. So for consistency of the user experience across modules, we use a blueprint template when modules are created. Our focus for this template changed for autumn 2020 as the VLE space became the main hub for the module, where in the past it was an area primarily for support or for certain key functions like assignment submission, accessing feedback, or reviewing material following in-person classes. This change in purpose required a different approach to how the VLE was used. So instead of having a front page that focused on linking to all of the different sections of the VLE, linking to all of the different guides that we had, it became a welcome page for the tutors to introduce themselves, to introduce the first steps that the students were to take on the module, and to just establish a lot more personality than simply having all of the links to the different sections. We still retained the built-in navigation, but trimmed it down to 3 key areas: learning and teaching, key contacts and information, and assessment. The starting point for modules was now a more engaging layout that incorporated graphics, a placeholder for video, and guidance on what teaching staff can add to the front page. We suggested this was the optimal place to introduce the teaching team, and that for the start of the semester, this would be the ideal place for first steps for students to be highlighted. Beyond the front page, we also changed how the information and resources were presented to students. In the past, we had used Canvas units, but this often led to it just being a list of files or pages. Those little structure, contextualization, or signposting. So our long-term goal was always to get people using pages a lot more, looking at how they can build a narrative, they can provide more context, embed activities. So we brought that expectation for years forward. I think probably 5 years or so is what some people have suggested, and that has become our core way of delivering all of our modules.
So there would have been no point at all as introducing the new template without putting training to support the academic staff as they put their modules together. We developed a course called SALT, which was supporting online learning and teaching. And it was a course that we taught over 5 days where all of the academics were at a distance from us. So we never actually got to meet them. And in fact, we delivered the first one when we were already in full lockdown. So there's a getting ready for the module, which we released on a Friday, and then day 1, the Monday, we looked at clarity in Canvas. We introduced them to the new template and explained how they could adopt a week-by-week approach to their teaching, building in lots of activities as they go. This was further explored on the second day, session design, access and inclusion, and looking particularly at how to make their work accessible, how to chunk things, and how to build in more activities. Day 3, we looked at community and communication. And interestingly, this was usually the day when the penny dropped, that the way that we were teaching them on this course was the way that we were hoping they teach the students. We were using Gilly Salmon principles, the 5-step plan, and actually we assembled this course using Carpe Diem, working with colleagues. So we built lots of aspects of the university into it. On day 4, we looked at online assessment and how that was going to have to change. And on day 5, we looked particularly at supporting learning engagement, which was things like looking at Flipgrid, Padlet, and other ways, discussion boards that we could engage our students. So it was all driven by pedagogy that we'd already known and tested, but everybody took that role of being a distance learner. And what amazed us was where sometimes to get 2 or 3 people to a training session, we had 400 learners over 8 weeks went through this training program. It was the most fantastic and exciting time that a lot of us have had for a while. It was also incredibly important to us that accessibility is built in. Accessibility was relatively new to many people in terms of digital accessibility, and we worked with Born Accessible principles, teaching people the most important aspects of digital accessibility as we went through. We explained why it was going to be important, and we also used the Stirling Accessibility checklist, which goes beyond workout standards and also looks at things like the language that you use and the approach that you take. All of our videos are captioned. We use Panopto as a system, and once we switched on auto captioning across all of our videos, so everything that was uploaded, and many staff were using weekly videos to start their sessions where they personally would introduce it. We also rolled out Blackboard Ally, and our Canvas pages are 99% fully digitally accessible. Our files uploaded are 41.5%, which is quite low, but the overall total gives us 74%. And Blackboard Ally said that overall we were standing very well as an institution in our accessibility.
So when we began planning for the autumn semester, one of the points we focused on was that social interactions, presence, and sense of community would be the key aspects of the student experience. The instinctive approach can sometimes be to focus on content, but the social interactions were more important and were probably more difficult to address. Some aspects of presence we tried to address from the outset with our new Canvas template. We encouraged and supported teaching staff to record introductory videos for their module. We included a placeholder on the module homepage to show where that could be presented. Establishing teacher presence this way was important to us as a starting point for building online communities. And as Roz said, in order to build that sense of community for students, we were using Gilly Salmon's 5-stage model. We were encouraging staff to plan the initial weeks to focus on building the community so that activities later in the module would be more beneficial to students. Low stakes activities were encouraged in the early weeks, encouraging students to share and to contribute to the community without fear or apprehension. We had to help students to feel comfortable in this environment, to help them build bonds with their peers and with the teaching staff. One interesting observation on the online presence came from feedback in one of our faculty learning and teaching committees, where it turned out that the first year students were adapting quicker to this situation, while one of our expectations was that first years might have a tougher time adapting because second, third and fourth year students had established relationships with their peers in person, and they had that sense of community associated with a physical campus. So what we've heard so far is not entirely backed up our expectations. And students who were familiar with in-person higher education seem to be a group that we're going to have to work harder on in the future in order to build that sense of presence and community.
It was really interesting to hear Sophie and Lucianne talking about how they'd worked with faculties as well, because we are all allocated a faculty within our institution, so we already had those contacts within the faculties, but there's something more credible about when it comes from the peers within the academic community. So fairly early on we established our faculty partners, so 3 to 4 academics per faculty worked really closely with us. Each faculty acted differently, and I think that's wholly appropriate because each faculty does work differently. Take the needs of courses that they have with regular communication and support. For example, natural sciences, which I support, we set up an academic team forum in Microsoft Teams, and we held really regular drop-in sessions there. Sometimes they were just drop-in sessions for a chat, and sometimes we ran extra little training sessions through there. But what's evolved is a team that now functions on its own. People answer each other's questions regularly. It's one of the best examples that I've ever seen of becoming a self-supporting community. We also took on students as partners, and they could be critical friends within a module. This was run by academic development, but students would visit a module that was almost release from faculty to theirs, so that they could actually be critical about it, and then they worked with the academic, explaining the things that were working well and the things that may need a little more attention. Back over to John.
Yes. So evaluation is part of the overall learning design process that we all know is important, but we all also know that when we're facing a long list of tasks and a never-ending queue of emails, this can be the part that we tend to neglect. Thankfully, in the autumn semester, evaluation is something that everyone at the university took very seriously. We had staff and student surveys early in the semester. For students, it was looking at their experience in the first 4 weeks of their module. For staff, it was reflecting in the first couple of weeks on how the support they had received over the summer had helped them to prepare for the autumn semester. So some of the feedback that we got from students was they loved the new template, were finding it much easier to navigate. Learning from shorter videos was a lot easier. They mostly liked synchronous learning sessions, although there is a lot more to examine here for future semesters, particularly for me about what role the expectations or a lack of sense of community had in influencing a preference for synchronous learning. There was also positive feedback on flexibility, on the way that we were embedding skills, and the more active approach to learning. From staff, one of the things that was consistent was a feeling of exhaustion because of how intense this period over the summer was for them. We definitely got a feeling that there was more understanding of what a learning technologist is and what we can do, and that there was a change of culture taking place. There was a keenness to learn new things, and time after time, I think, as we're all sick of hearing when you ask for feedback, what would be the one thing you would change? I would like more time to work on this. And just a final piece of feedback of one of the contradictions that we got in the feedback was a desire for some staff were wanting a lot more choice about how they were doing things, how they were being told to do things or suggested they should do things, whereas others were expecting us to tell them exactly what to do week by week and almost dictate what their pedagogy and practice should be. So I think going forward there is an interesting contradiction, not a conundrum which I put on the slide, contradiction about how we're going to support this going forward.
I quite like the use of conundrum, actually. Okay, so I just skipped slide 10. Let's go back again. So taking things forward, I think there are some really big challenges here. 5 years progress in 5 months is about what we think we've made if we look ahead to what we were hoping to do. Our rapid transition has been the best that it could be, but we all know that there's more we could do. I've got lists coming out of my ears at the moment of things that I still want to try, and I know that academics have lots of things to spur them on as well. So we're continually modifying, we're looking ahead, but we don't know what HE is going to look like in the future. There's so much uncertainty in the sector, not just COVID related, but many other things that are changing in our society as a whole. So we really need to be on the ball and ready and quick to respond to many of these things. And I think that we've demonstrated that we could do that. now. But Teams, Microsoft Teams, we had to give a special mention to Microsoft Teams. We have used it so much, it's completely changed the way that we respond to staff, where previously we might have made an appointment with somebody and gone to see them, and it would all have taken a lot of time. Staff now feel quite happy just to give us a quick buzz on Teams. They can share their screen, and we can talk things through much more efficiently than we could previously. That's not to say we don't want the face-to-face at some stage, but it's certainly been something that we've all noted as actually being a really positive way to work with our colleagues. I think there's a lot of interesting debates to be had, and I know it's a really cliched phrase, but I think it's appropriate because we all need to know what the new normal will be, and I suspect it won't be static, and it'll be constantly changing, and it'll mean that learning technologists have a job for some time to come, which is a really positive thing. So thank you very much for your time. We're really pleased that you've been able to join us in this, and that's the end of our presentation, but our contact details are there. I will link to our accessibility checklist as well in a second. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ros and John. So again, if I can invite the audience to show your appreciation in the usual way. Excellent. So we have had a couple of questions already picked up in the chat by John, so thank you for that. Matthias had asked about whether you'd used a template, and you said you tried to give staff a starting point, but they had a choice of how they would use it, and you're looking at using these as optional templates in the future. And then Jennifer had asked whether training was mandatory or not, and you said that it was not mandatory but encouraged. Now, I know there have been a lot of other questions in the chat, and I'm afraid we won't get to them all in this last 5 minutes, folks, but I will make sure that they're all passed on to Ros and John, and we can pick them up through the conference website later on. So I did see a hand up go up just a second ago, so if whoever wanted to ask that question could put their hand back up. Meantime, I'm going to give you two that have come from the chat. So Ruth Drysdale was asking, does anyone normally check your transcript recordings? And Lorraine Danton was asking, how did staff cope with the shorter videos? So maybe if you could start with those two questions, please.
I'll take the transcript one. I did a lot of work on this, and I've actually been working directly with Panopto on this as well. Panopto upgraded their ASR, which is automated speech recognition machine, over the summer, and we suddenly noticed a drastic improvement in the quality of what was coming through from automated speech recognition. So after some testing, I was quite happy that we switched it on across the institution. Of course, there are errors because it will never recognise people's names or the names of complex chemicals in chemistry and things like that. Some academic staff have taken it upon themselves to correct keywords within their presentations, but I tried to make it clear very early on, as did my colleagues, that there's no requirement to do this, that the captions are there to support. They're not there to be 100% accurate. Having said that, for students who have an adjustment that requires them to have an accurate transcript, we can still provide that by providing human level transcription services as well. So but generally I would advise people not to correct them unless they felt a real compulsion to do so and had the time to do so.
Yeah, and I think just to briefly follow up on something that comes up there is that we try to encourage staff to script their videos in advance, which means that there can actually be the advantage that you share the script that you worked from alongside the video, and then even if the auto captions aren't quite correct, you can still have Word document sitting alongside it that has the correct chemical names. And in the case of our university, it's not going to convert it to Darling, which apparently Stirling becomes in some of Panopto's auto captions. The question about short videos, I think that's, as one of the people who's been working on our online learning design, it's been an ongoing battle to get people to accept that shorter videos are more engaging, more relevant, and also easier to update as you know, if a concept changes, if the law changes and you need to change one segment, you're just changing that little bit, not the full lecture. So there's always that reuse aspect.
It was definitely the most controversial part of our SALT course when we suggested these shorter videos, and the discussions that we had were incredible and very enriching in all sorts of ways, actually, as well.
Yeah, and I took quite a strong line on saying 6 minutes maximum, almost as a negotiating point with staff, because that helped get them down to perhaps 15 minutes from an hour, which was really quite helpful. So there is research out there on the effectiveness of 6-minute videos, and actually a more controversial part was scripting, because we were trying to tell people you should script in advance. There's a framework called segmenting, signaling, and weeding that we suggest people use when they're making videos. And all of a sudden, we hear from people who consider themselves storytellers who speak for an hour at students with no script, which might work in person. I think the word might is doing a lot of lifting in that sentence. But for online learning, it doesn't quite work. And that there's lots of evidence to say that being more focused is more important for your videos that focus on teaching. For videos that focus on social interaction, feel free to engage with your personality and have your cat jump up. I think that's one of the things that's been quite popular in the past 6 months.
And it's been very interesting to see the staff shift on this as well, because I think initially they were faced with the very daunting task of recording them all for the whole term. And now that the term's over, they're actually saying, actually, I've got some really good resources here that I can reuse, and I don't really intend to go back to delivering lectures in the way that I did previously. And personally, I've seen a real shift in staff attitudes now that the job has been done for a term. I think once a year has been completed, there'll be some real thinking about what time with the students is used for. And I know that's what we all know as a flipped learning model, and probably something that we've been advocating for a long time, but it's really interesting to see that that shift is really happening.
Thanks, Ros and John. I did say that we would do Nicola's question, so I'm going to squeeze that in, but I realise if other folk have to step away. So Nicola was asking, did you have guidance for the students who were critical friends?
Yes, there was a guidance document provided. It was a checklist. It was headings. It's probably something I could get hold of to share if you're interested, but it was based on themes which we'd asked staff to work to as well. So there wasn't any right or wrong in things. There was suggestions based along themes.
Thank you. I'm afraid to say that we are up to time, folks. So I'm going to ask you all once again to say a very big thank you to Sophie Meese and Lucianne Pickering from University of South Wales, and to Ros Walker and John McMillan for giving us a very interesting and thought-provoking session. We've heard key themes from them today about the importance of institutional buy-in, about framing our work in terms of principles and pedagogic foundations, about how important it is to embed accessibility from the very start. Most of all, the teamwork that both groups have exemplified to us, and I think if we can emulate that, we'll be doing very well. So thank you all very much for your time, and for our presenters and our participants. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Just want to say thank you ever so much for chairing as well, Rosemary. Excellent chairing. And well done to keeping it to time and everything. Well done, folks. That was really, really great. I'm going to stop the recording now.